Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, Anders, I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting me. At this moment in time, obviously, it's lovely for me to come to a country where you had a referendum and voted to join the European Union. So it makes a nice change for me to be in such an atmosphere. Obviously, I'm going to be speaking English, so apologies to those of you whose English isn't very good. I have one word of Swedish. I will save that until the very end. Okay, so for about the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about how nationwide building society rediscovered its history in the last 3 years, and what we've been doing to make more of that history, to tell that story to the people who work for Nationwide, and to tell that story to people who we want to become members of Nationwide. And it also has influenced what we're going to do next with Nationwide. So the history has become a very, very important part of Nationwide, and I'm going to share with you how we've done that. Okay, first of all, let me slightly correct what Anders just said. So Nationwide is a building society, not a bank, but in terms of the products that it offers, it's exactly the same as a bank. We do savings, we do mortgages, but we also do current accounts, home insurance, mobile banking app, all the kind of things you expect from a bank you can get from Nationwide Building Society. However, there are some very crucial differences, and that's about ownership and governance. And that really stems from our history. So let me just take you back to that picture. It's a grimy pub in Birmingham, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. The pub is called the Golden Cross. The year is 1775, and the people in that pub have come together to grumble, to moan. Okay, they're moaning because they don't have houses, they can't afford a house, the rents are terrible. They want to come up with a solution to this problem. And the solution is that they can fund them themselves by paying regularly into a pot that's normally kept behind the bar. They trust the man who runs the pub. So they keep the money there, and when there's enough money in the pot from their savings, they take it in turns to take the money out and build their own house. And that's the beginning of the building society movement in 1775. Now, that was a very popular model. It was a very grassroots movement. It was all about ordinary people coming together to help themselves. And that model spread throughout the UK. So by the mid-19th century, there's probably thousands of building societies in every town and city in the UK. Now, there's also a political dimension to building societies, because in the UK, up until the mid-19th century, to have a vote, you have to have property. And so if you were a member of a building society and had a house, it meant you had a vote. So there was a big political dimension to joining a building society and becoming part of that movement. And building societies have often been associated with kind of anti-establishment figures and anti-establishment groups in the UK. So there's a very different historical narrative to that of banks. How that plays out today is that building societies are not owned by shareholders, they are owned by their members. So if you have a current account or a mortgage or a savings account with Nationwide Building Society, then you are a member of Nationwide Building Society. And you get to vote in the AGM, and you get to have a say in the strategy, and you get to ask direct questions about what Nationwide is doing. Okay. That ends my history lesson about the history of the building society movement. But I just wanted to stress that Nationwide is not a niche player. It's very much a big player in the financial services industry in the UK. It has 15 million members in the UK. It's the second largest provider of home loans. We're not talking about a small niche player. We're talking about a major financial services organisation. Okay. So, Nationwide's history I've told you about in general, but in the last 3 years, it has massively changed within Nationwide. And the sort of catalyst for that was really a new CEO who came in 2016. He wanted to change Nationwide's strategy, and he came in with a very fixed idea that Nationwide was not using its history, was not making the most of its unique brand and its unique heritage. So he put a new strategy overhaul within place, and he also said that Nationwide had to hire an archivist, which is when I came into the story. Now, that picture is me on day 2 in the job. So day 1 was, you go into the office, you meet everyone, you get your laptop. everything works. Day 2, I had to go and find the archives because I'd taken this job totally on trust that there were actually some archives in the organisation. No one could show me them. No one could tell me about them. There was no catalogue. I was hoping that there really was going to be something out there. So day 2, I went to a place called Northampton, to the basement. I went down there and I found a whole load of archives that had been stuck there and forgotten about. Now, if you could do a little speech bubble or a thought bubble coming out of my head, you can provide your own Swedish translation. But what I'm actually thinking when they took that photo is, oh my God. What am I going to do here? So none of that was catalogued. No one knew what was there. It was totally in disarray, no order whatsoever. And I had the job to put that in order, but crucially to come up with the story behind Nationwide, which had been totally forgotten about. On the same day that I went down to the basement, the head of marketing and advertising phoned me to say, when is our start date? No one even knows when we started. So that was how much Nationwide had forgotten about its history. Okay, so how did I go about turning that into a much-loved, much-value asset at the heart of Nationwide? Well, the first thing I had to do was to find out why Nationwide was founded. Okay, so there was lots and lots of books and minute books and everything in there, and I thought, I don't want to just put a timeline together. I need to know the purpose of this organisation. Why was it set up? Who set it up? What was the aim of it? And I found it in that small handwritten document. So that's a 6-page handwritten document by a gentleman called Mr. Cooper, whose idea it was to set up this particular building society. And he wrote this long document about how it was going to help struggling families, how it was going to help people who couldn't pay their rents, how it was going to help cooperative societies buy their own shops and stores. And there's a lovely little sentence at the end where he says the society should be for its members, not for the capitalists. And that was a great little encapsulation of why Nationwide was set up. And so that gave me the why to start with. Now, after that, and obviously I had to put a lot more bones onto the story, and I called it Nationwide in a nutshell. So it was a précis of what Nationwide had done and why it had done it. Now, that's great. That means I now know about the story, but how do I get it out to the rest of Nationwide and to the rest of the world? Well, of course, I had a powerful ally. Okay, so my powerful ally was the CEO who had initially hired me. Now, he was very keen on the history, and he made me go into a room with him, and it was almost like a sort of a fireside chat. I had to talk him through Nationwide's history using lots of things from the archives. And then we sat down with a speechwriter, and we turned that into a 40-minute presentation on Nationwide's history. And he decided he was going to use that as the basis of a huge all-employee event at the Birmingham NEC. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever been to the Birmingham NEC. It's the kind of thing you do to go and watch Take That or something like that, huge venue. And Nationwide hired it for a week. Every single employee was invited to come to this event. So it ran the same event on every day during that week. And every morning started with the CEO telling Nationwide's story, using items from the archives, using quotes from the archives. We even let him borrow something real from the archives to show. So it was really grounded in reality and really underpinned by credibility. Now, the rest of the day, after they'd had their 40-minute history lesson, all the staff went off and learnt about the new renewed strategy and what was going to be happening in Nationwide in the future. There was obviously a huge feedback evaluation done at that event. And the most surprising thing was that the main thing that the staff had remembered and taken away with them was about the history. So I've just given you an example of one of the quotes that came back. And that is very typical of the kind of feedback we had. It was why weren't we told this before? This is an amazing story. We feel so proud to work here. We just love the history. Tell us more. And we understood then that there was a real power in purpose, in sharing that purpose with our staff. Okay, now the thing was, you can't just have that as a one-off. You can't just tell them the story and expect everyone to remember it, because you're constantly getting new staff on board. So we made sure that the history then became part of the induction process, and it physically became a centrepiece in all our major offices. So that's a photo of the timeline, which now runs down the middle of Nationwide's head office, and that's replicated in the other major offices of Nationwide throughout the UK. We also changed our branch marketing. So that's on the end there, that's an example of a poster that now goes into the branches. So all the branch staff could share our story with members. It's like a sort of conversational starter for our staff to talk to members about. And the other thing we did was we revived a staff competition that had run until the 1960s, which was called the Arthur Webb Challenge Cup, named after one of the sort of big figures in our history, a gentleman called Arthur Webb. And we revived that as a staff suggestion scheme, but sort of more than that, it's very engaging. It's asking people to be innovative and entrepreneurial. But it's at the very heart of it is this story of Arthur Webb, who helped to support and push the progress of the Building Society forward. So the staff now have really bought into the fact that the history is central and the history is important and the history can give you energy and motivation. So that's great internally, but then what did we do about taking that story externally to use it in our external marketing? Okay, so I got in touch with the advertising agency and the advertising team within Nationwide. We sat down, had lots of workshops and brainstorming about how we could build this story to life. And the one thing that we started with was this founding purpose and the story of Mr. Cooper getting together his colleagues and friends and saying that they needed to form a building society to help ordinary people. And that became our new advert. Let's see if this will play. This is always the moment I worry about. Will it actually work? Oh, just before we start this. So we had a big conversation about what was the best way to tell a story, because you don't want it to make it sound like a history lesson. You want it to be engaging and entertaining. So we decided to get a poet to write a poem about the founding and then tell that. We had tried some other ways. We thought of engaging someone famous like Stephen Fry to actually tell the story, but he was so expensive that we had to come up with a different solution. And this was the solution.
3, 2, 1, action.
A black and white empire. London, 1884. The foundries churn out change. There's far more smoke than air. And in this giddy town, far more working heads than places to lay them down. You want your own roof, you better have pinstripes and money to spare. Fortune favours the fortunate, small change there. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, who thinks they matter? Mr. Cooper does. Help each other and we all get up the ladder, Mr. Cooper says. We all have a share. We all get a vote. We're in the same boat. Stand together and build. A nation of helpers, a nation of houses with hopers inside. The currency of kindness. Nationwide.
Okay, so we were really pleased with that. Thank you. And you might have noticed there was not one mention of a product, a savings rate. You know, we're not doing advertising about products. We're doing advertising solely on brand and brand values. And that is the way we're now going in Nationwide, because of that has proved so successful. And I will come to how we measured that in a second. But it was so successful internally as well. So all the staff loved this kind of advertising. It really made them feel so proud to be part of Nationwide. And that was something that we hadn't expected either. That was almost like a great side effect. It was so good, we decided we had to do another advert along those lines. So I was asked to come up with another story. So one of the great bits of archives that I found in the basement was our first mortgage register. So the mortgage register, this is an extract here on the left. So I said, let's take the first line of the mortgage register, our first ever mortgage customer, and see if we can do some research on that person, find out their family story, see if we can bring that to life. That's a really real, relatable story. People today can understand how different it can make your life to have a mortgage and have a better family home. So we put that together as a brief for the advertising agency. because we now had a real confidence in how that would land, we also did a big print campaign around this advert as well. So the middle image is the print campaign that was on all the inside tunnels of a London Underground. Now, that's not cheap, okay? So Nationwide was really putting the money behind this advertising campaign. And again, this really underlined how real it was, the way we had the snippets around the actual poem. And the photos, by the way, are really of the family, because the other thing we did was trace the family descendants and go and talk to them, first of all, to get their permission that we could use their family story in an advert, and secondly, to ask them if they could contribute their own family photos towards it as well. We also ran a competition for members. We offered to do their history of their home. And we had thousands of people applied for that competition. So we really saw that this was really hitting home. And this was what the next advert looked like. That's the mortgage register, obviously.
Elizabeth and Alfred Idle are Victorians, librarians, lending worthy books to milliners and coachmen. Every borrower bets on a better life tomorrow. Behind the hairpins and white collars, hell, a devil's acre full of slums and sweatshops. Alfred knows it well. He wants clean air, good drains, fair pay. Elizabeth wants her say. Next thing, she'll want the vote. For now, she'll settle for her 9 kids sleeping safe beneath a roof they call their own. The price of hope, 6 bob a week for hearth and home. Alfred Idle signs the dotted lifeline and becomes our mortgage number 1.
That's the actual house. Okay. So I think that's a great example of how you could take a tiny line in a mortgage register and turn that into a really, really engaging advertising campaign. Okay, so let's talk about how successful that was. So Nationwide, like every other large organisation, has a monthly brand metric scores, but we probably measure on slightly different things to other organisations. So our first measure is on brand consideration, so how much members or non-members would be likely to consider our brand to buy a product. The second thing we measure on is how much people trust us compared with our competitors. And the third thing we measure on is how much people think we put people before profit. And it's worth saying as well that those measurements are important to every member of Nationwide who work for Nationwide, because that is how our bonus is determined. It's not by profit, it's by those measurements and by customer service measurements as well. Okay, so there's obviously been so much, huge amount of metrics around those measurements, and all of them showed spikes during and straight after those advertising campaigns. So in the small extract I've got here, the red line is HSBC, which I had to put in there because I used to work for HSBC. And the blue line is Nationwide, which you can see is far, far above. And the spikes in there coincide with when we ran those advertising campaigns. So we could see that they were really landing well with the public as well. Now, as well as those metrics, our head of marketing and advertising was voted Marketeer of the Year by her peers. And in her acceptance speech, she said the most important thing that we'd done at Nationwide was to rediscover our purpose and to hire an archivist, which was very nice to hear. Now, the way that the archives and history have played into the current strategy and the way we're going forward, God, I hope that's not my mum asking me how it went. So the picture on the end is the Magnificent Seven. So these are now the 7 brand principles that people in the strategy team and the product team at Nationwide have to consider when they're putting together a new proposal or a new product. And those take into account all the kind of values and purpose that we've been talking about. So they were come up with through workshops with myself and other people in the archives and the brand and advertising team. Now, I've called this What Would Mr. Cooper Do Today? Because our strategy team that looks at new initiatives for new income streams has also been called What Would Mr. Cooper Do Today? And they always have that in their minds when they are thinking about new proposals. We actually have a new head of strategy who joined the organisation on Monday. So Monday, she met with all the senior execs. Tuesday morning, she had an hour with me where I talked her through the history of Nationwide. And now I didn't request that, she requested that. So that shows you how much the history of the organisation has bumped up the agenda in the last 3 years. Now, the other great thing that's happened is that because Nationwide has a confident voice and has a confidence about its own purpose, it's very easy for Nationwide to say what it is about the organisation that makes it different to other organisations. And that in turn means that it's much bolder and more confident about making a difference for the future. So 2 of the initiatives that Nationwide has started in the last couple of years in making sure that members have a much bigger say on what we do. So there's a member strategy board now, as well as a board strategy board. And we also have regional community boards for members to sit on and decide how we distribute our charitable money to local housing-related charities. The other major thing we've done is decide to build a community. So what is a building society if it doesn't actually build a society? So for the first time since Victorian times, Nationwide has bought some land in Swindon, where the head office is. We've just had planning permission through, and we are actually going to build a community, a new community within Swindon, as part of our attempt to get over the housing issue in the UK. And now, my Swedish word, tack.
Questions for Sara? I'll start off and you can say as much as you want.
Okay.
But since you did work at HSBC
Yes.
before, similarities, differences, they are a huge bank in the traditional sense.
Very different. I thought it was going to be very similar when I went to Nationwide because, it's the same kind of products, the same kind of organisation, but it was very, very different, I found, in focus and priority. So at HSBC, the thing that was always at the back of our mind was share price, always share price. And everything was very short-term about share price. I was also, I would say, asked to manipulate the history at HSBC more than I have been at Nationwide. So every time HSBC changed its strategy, I was asked to support that with particular stories from the archives. Sometimes I just said, no, it's just not possible. At Nationwide, I would say the focus is very different. It's about the members. It's always about the members, giving them what they need and what they want. So yeah, it's very different in feel, in culture.
Yep. Magnus?
Nationwide looks very much like a cooperative movement, cooperation movement. So
yeah,
that was a cooperation to me. It's invented in UK.
Yeah. It started life as the Cooperative Permanent Building Society.
Okay.
It only changed its name to Nationwide in 1970. So Mr. Cooper was a very hot cooperator.
So my question is, do you have some kind of cooperation with other cooperative organizations or movements or something like that? Or are you working totally on your own?
Okay, so we work on our own, but there's about 40 other building societies in the UK that have the same model. And because we're the biggest and the sort of leader in the society, we try to lead for the society. We're also part of, there's an umbrella movement in the UK for cooperatives as a whole, and we're part of that as well.
Yeah.
What is the cost of being a member and for how long do they stay with you?
For a huge amount of time, I would say. That to be a member, you just have to have a current account, a mortgage or savings of more than £500. So, that's all it is to be a member. And in terms of loyalty, we can only tell from when we do events and we ask people how long they've been with Nationwide. And they do tend to be on the upper scale, so 20 years plus. So once they're in, they very rarely leave. We have a huge amount of switchers who switch from banks to Nationwide, but it's not often that people move from Nationwide away completely.
Question in the back.
Thank you. Has storytelling, or rather your history, it's inspired storytelling in an excellent way, I think. Has it also been used as a means of inspiring innovation or strategy?
Yes, absolutely. So the What Would Mr. Cooper Do Today team is the strategy team that looks at new income streams. And I was asked to go and speak to each of the teams within that big team and do workshops with them as part of sort of creating ideas and creating innovation.
Thank you. As an archivist, my question is, are you still a lone archivist with the nationwide? Or maybe you have some helpers?
I have one other person now, one other person.
One another person.
Yeah,
and how you manage to organize all this old, huge
by working
material?
long hours.
Are you still there?
Okay, what I would say is, since I've been there, the archive side of work in terms of cataloguing and conservation and collecting, that has maybe taken a back seat sometimes to this more outreach, marketing-facing work, which is why I now have an extra person who is dealing much more with those kind of things. Yeah, but it's definitely a balance in an archive job, isn't it, where you're expected to do this kind of thing as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you again. And before you leave the stage, some flowers and a book that we just published in English.